Let me explain something powerful about human nature, especially when it comes to love and attraction. Absence creates awareness and emotional curiosity. That's not a theory, that's a fact. You don't truly recognize the value of something until it's no longer right in front of you. And that applies directly to relationships. When you are always present, always accessible, always available at a moment's notice, your presence becomes expected instead of appreciated. The heart doesn't respond to what it already feels guaranteed. A man doesn't sit around thinking deeply about what he believes will always be there. He doesn't question it, he doesn't examine it, and he doesn't protect it emotionally. Why would he? In his mind, there's no urgency. But the moment your presence changes, when your calls slow down, when your energy shifts, when you're no longer filling every quiet space of his life, awareness begins. And awareness is where emotional curiosity is born. See, silence does something noise never can. Silence forces reflection. When you pull away without anger, without arguments, without dramatic exits, you leave behind unanswered questions. And unanswered questions live rent, free in a man's mind. He starts wondering what changed. He replays conversations. He checks his phone more often. He starts feeling the gap you used to fill without even realizing it. Absence gives a man time to think, and thinking is dangerous when emotions are involved. Because once he starts thinking, he starts remembering. He remembers how you listened. He remembers how you supported him. He remembers how you made him feel understood. And those memories don't hit him when you're constantly around. They hit him when you're gone. Ladies, understand this clearly. Pulling away does not mean disappearing to hurt him. It means stepping back so he can finally see you. Emotional curiosity grows when a man is no longer being emotionally fed without effort. When you stop giving automatic access to your time and energy, he begins to recognize the value of what he was receiving. Here's the truth most people don't talk about. Men bond emotionally through absence more than presence. Women bond through closeness, communication, and connection. Men bond through reflection. That reflection only happens when space exists. When you pull away, you create that space. And in that space, his emotions finally get a voice. At night, when distractions fade, that's when absence hits hardest. That's when your silence feels loud. That's when curiosity turns into longing. He wonders if you're thinking about him, if someone else has your attention, if he missed something important. And that's when emotional attachment deepens. Not because you chased, but because you stepped back. Absence also shifts power dynamics. When you stop being the one who always initiates, always checks in, always keeps the emotional connection alive, the responsibility moves to him. And once he feels that responsibility, his awareness sharpens. He realizes that connection requires effort, that you are contributing more than he noticed. Ladies and gentlemen, when a woman pulls away with dignity and confidence, she sends a silent message that says, my life is full, my worth is stable, my presence is earned. That message triggers emotional curiosity because now he has to decide, step forward or step aside. And either way, clarity replaces confusion. Absence is not rejection. Absence is revelation. It reveals how deeply someone values you when they no longer have unlimited access to you. It reveals whether his interest was convenience or connection. And most importantly, it allows him to feel something real instead of coasting on comfort. That's why pulling away the right way works. Because absence doesn't make you forgotten. It makes you unforgettable. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey here. Let me break down something that changes the game for a lot of women once they truly understand it. Over-availability weakens desire and respect. That doesn't mean caring is wrong. It doesn't mean loving deeply is a mistake. It means when access to you becomes unlimited, effortless, and guaranteed, the value of that access starts to drop in a man's mind. Not because he's evil, not because he's cruel, but because human nature doesn't protect what it believes it can never lose. When you are always the one calling, always the one checking in, always adjusting your schedule, always making yourself emotionally available, no matter what, you slowly teach a man that your time has no boundaries. And when there are no boundaries, there is no urgency. When there is no urgency, desire fades into comfort. And comfort without effort kills attraction. A man respects what requires intention. He respects what doesn't come easily. He respects what has standards. When you are constantly present, constantly reassuring, constantly fixing emotional gaps for him, you remove the need for him to step up. He doesn't have to wonder about you because you're always right there. He doesn't have to pursue you because you've already arrived. Over-availability also shifts the balance of effort. Relationships are meant to be a two-way exchange, but when one person is always giving more time, more energy, more attention, the other unconsciously gives less. Not because they decide to, but because they don't feel the pressure to show up. Your consistency becomes something he relies on instead of something he appreciates. Ladies, hear me clearly. Desire grows in the space between moments, not in constant contact. Missing someone is a powerful emotional experience. It forces reflection. It creates longing. It deepens attachment. But when you're always available, there is nothing to miss. You become part of the background instead of the highlight. Respect works the same way. When you drop everything for a man, cancel plans, ignore your own needs, and make him the center of your world too early, you unintentionally communicate that your life revolves around him. And when a man senses that he is your entire world, he stops seeing himself as lucky and starts seeing himself as comfortable. Comfort is dangerous when it comes too soon. Comfort makes people lazy. It makes effort optional. It makes appreciation quiet. But when access to you is limited, when your time is valuable, when your attention must be earned, a man treats you differently. He listens more closely. He thinks before he speaks. He shows up because he knows your presence is not automatic. Overavailability can also blur your sense of self. When you give too much too fast, you begin adjusting who you are to keep the connection alive. You explain yourself too much. You tolerate behavior you wouldn't normally accept. You shrink your boundaries to avoid conflict. And once respect is compromised, desire follows right behind it. Men are drawn to women who have a full life, strong boundaries, and a clear sense of self. A woman who doesn't disappear into a relationship is magnetic. Because she isn't asking to be chosen, she's allowing herself to be discovered. And discovery fuels desire far more than availability ever could. When you pull back from being overly accessible, something shifts. A man starts to notice your absence. He becomes aware of the effort you used to make. He realizes that your energy was a gift, not a guarantee. And once that realization hits, respect grows. Because respect is born from understanding value, not convenience. Ladies and gentlemen, limiting access is not about punishment. It's about balance. It's about allowing desire to breathe and respect to grow. When you stop being everywhere all the time, you give a man the opportunity to step towards you. And when he steps forward on his own, that's when desire becomes real. Let me clear up one of the biggest misunderstandings people have about pulling away. Pulling away is not manipulation. It is not a trick. It is not a strategy to control someone's emotions. Pulling away, when done the right way, is an act of self-worth. And there is a huge difference between the two. Manipulation comes from fear. Self-worth comes from confidence. When you pull away because you're scared of losing someone, you act anxious, inconsistent, and reactive. But when you pull away because you respect yourself, your energy stays calm, steady, and grounded. And men can feel that difference immediately. A woman who values herself does not pull away to provoke a reaction. She pulls away because she recognizes when she is given more than she is receiving. She pulls away because she understands that love should not require chasing, begging, or shrinking herself. And that kind of pullback is powerful because it is rooted in dignity, not desperation. See, manipulation says, let me disappear, so he panics. Self-worth says, let me step back because this dynamic no longer honors me. One is about control. The other is about alignment. And men respond very differently to each. When a woman pulls away from a place of self-worth, she doesn't announce it. She doesn't threaten. She doesn't explain herself endlessly. She simply redirects her energy back to her own life, her work, her peace, her growth, her happiness. And that shift is noticeable because it's real. Men are intuitive when it comes to energy. They may not always articulate it, but they feel when a woman stops over-investing. They feel when her attention is no longer guaranteed. And when that shift is rooted in self-respect, it triggers something deep. Not fear, but awareness. A man begins to ask himself questions. Not because he's being manipulated, but because the balance has changed. He senses that you are no longer waiting. that you are no longer bending, that you are no longer placing his comfort above your own. And that realization forces him to reevaluate how he shows up. Self-worth changes the way you pull away. You don't do it angrily. You don't do it dramatically. You don't punish or test. You simply stop overextending. You stop chasing clarity from someone who is giving confusion. You stop explaining your value to someone who should already see it. Ladies, when you operate from self-worth, you don't need to convince a man of anything. You let your standards speak for you. And standards are attractive because they create structure. They communicate that access to you requires effort, consistency, and respect. Here's what manipulation can never create. Genuine desire. Manipulation might create temporary attention, but it never builds lasting respect. Self-worth does. Because when a man realizes that you are choosing yourself instead of clinging to him, he sees you differently. Not as someone trying to be chosen, but as someone who knows she has options. Pulling away from self-worth also protects your emotional health. You stop tying your happiness to his behavior. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop measuring your value by his response time. And that emotional independence is magnetic. Because confidence is not loud. It is calm. Men are drawn to women who are emotionally stable within themselves. A woman who doesn't need constant reassurance. A woman who doesn't collapse when things slow down. A woman who can stand still without panicking. That kind of woman commands respect without demanding it. When you pull away from self-worth, you allow the truth to surface. If he steps forward, it's because he wants to, not because he was forced. If he doesn't, you gain clarity without losing yourself. Either way, you win, because you didn't abandon your standards to hold on to potential. Ladies and gentlemen, self-worth is the foundation of healthy attraction. When you pull away from that place, you're not playing games. You're playing your role correctly. You're saying, without words, I value myself enough to require mutual effort. And that message lingers in a man's mind far longer than any tactic ever could. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey here. Silence has a power most people underestimate. When words stop, the mind gets loud. And that is exactly why silence forces a man to reflect on your value. When you are always explaining, always clarifying, always checking in, you fill every gap with noise. That noise keeps him comfortable. It keeps him distracted. It keeps him from having to think too deeply about what you mean to him. But when you step back and allow silence to exist, something changes. Silence removes distraction. It creates space. And in that space, reflection begins. A man starts to notice what's missing, not in a dramatic way at first, but subtly. He notices the quiet moments where your voice used to be, the pauses where your messages used to arrive, the emotional support that used to feel automatic. Silence doesn't argue. Silence doesn't beg. Silence doesn't demand answers. And that's why it's so effective. It leaves room for his own thoughts to surface. And once a man is left alone with his thoughts, memories start replaying, conversations. Lotta, the way you listened, the way you understood him when others didn't, when you constantly speak, explain, and push for reassurance, you rob him of the chance to feel your absence. But when you go quiet in a healthy, confident way, you give him the opportunity to experience the emotional weight of losing access to you. And that weight makes him reflect on your value. Reflection is where attachment grows, not during constant interaction, but during stillness. A man realizes what you brought into his life only when that contribution is no longer present. He starts to see patterns he took for granted. Your consistency, your patience, your presence. And once he recognizes those things, he begins to feel the emotional cost of losing them. Silence also removes emotional pressure. When you stop asking where you stand, when you stop pushing for clarity, when you stop demanding reassurance, he no longer feels controlled or cornered. Instead, he feels free to choose. And when a man feels free to choose, his choices become more honest. A man thinking about you in silence is far more powerful than a man responding to you out of obligation. Silence gives him ownership of his feelings. It allows him to arrive at conclusions on his own. And conclusions reached independently are stronger than conclusions forced by conversation. There is something deeply unsettling about silence when someone mattered. It creates a mirror. He starts looking at himself, his effort, his behavior, his consistency. He starts questioning whether he did enough, whether he showed up properly, whether he valued you the way he should have. Silence also communicates confidence. It says you trust yourself enough not to chase answers. It says you respect yourself enough not to over-explain. It says you believe your value will be felt without words. And confidence is magnetic because confidence doesn't need validation to survive. When a woman stays silent from a place of strength, not anger, it shifts the emotional dynamic. She becomes unpredictable in the best way. Not emotionally chaotic, but emotionally grounded. And that stability makes a man curious. He wonders what changed. He wonders where your energy went. He wonders if you've outgrown the situation. That curiosity pulls him inward. He starts observing instead of assuming. He starts thinking instead of reacting. And thinking is where emotional attachment deepens. Because once he starts thinking about you without prompts, without reminders, without messages, you've entered his mind on a deeper level. Silence gives your value room to echo. Words fade quickly. Silence lingers. It sits with him during quiet moments, late nights, early mornings. It shows up when distractions are gone. And in those moments, your absence speaks louder than anything you ever said. Silence is not coldness. It is composure. It is restraint. It is emotional maturity. And when used correctly, it becomes a mirror that reflects your importance back to him. Because the quiet you leave behind forces him to confront one truth. Your presence mattered more than he realized. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey here. Let me tell you something every woman needs to understand at a deep level. A confident woman does not chase, she chooses. And that mindset alone changes everything about how a man sees you, thinks about you, and values you. Chasing puts you in a position of proving. Choosing puts you in a position of power. And power, when it's quiet and grounded, is irresistible. When you chase a man, you unintentionally communicate that you are unsure of your worth. You start initiating everything. You start over-giving. You start tolerating uncertainty just to keep the connection alive. And the more you chase, the less he feels the need to move. Because movement only happens when there is something to move toward, not something running after him. A confident woman understands that her time, energy, and presence are valuable. She does not throw them at someone hoping they'll be appreciated. She offers them selectively. And that selectiveness creates intrigue. A man starts paying attention because he senses that access to you is not automatic, it must be earned. Choosing instead of chasing changes your behavior in subtle but powerful ways. You stop double texting. You stop over-explaining. You stop filling silences out of anxiety. You stop rearranging your life to fit into moments where you were never fully invited. And when those behaviors stop, a man notices. Because the dynamic changes. Men are naturally wired to pursue what feels meaningful and slightly out of reach. Not unreachable, but not guaranteed either. When you chase, you remove the pursuit. When you choose, you invite him to step forward. And if he doesn't, you don't panic. You simply observe. Because a woman who chooses knows that mutual effort is the minimum requirement, not a bonus. Confidence is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't threaten to leave. It doesn't demand attention. Confidence is calm. It's the ability to sit back and let someone reveal who they are through their actions. And when a man realizes that you are not chasing his validation, he begins to question his own position in your life. A confident woman does not fear losing someone who isn't fully showing up. She understands that chasing potential keeps her stuck, while choosing alignment sets her free. That freedom is attractive, because desperation repels, but self-assurance pulls people in. When you stop chasing, you give a man space to feel the absence of your effort. He starts noticing what you used to do, the emotional labor you carried, the consistency you offered. And once that effort is gone, he has to decide whether he wants to replace it with his own. Choosing also protects your self-respect. You no longer convince yourself to accept mixed signals. You no longer negotiate your standards to keep someone interested. You let interest show itself. And if it doesn't, you move accordingly without bitterness or drama. A man thinking about you day and night doesn't happen because you chased him into exhaustion. It happens because you left him room to wonder, to miss, to reflect, to step up. And that only happens when you pull back with confidence instead of pushing forward with fear. When a woman chooses herself, her life remains full. She keeps her routines, her passions, her friendships, her sense of identity. She doesn't disappear into a relationship. And that wholeness makes her presence feel like a bonus, not a necessity. And bonuses are valued differently. Men respect women who respect themselves. Not because they're perfect, but because they're grounded. They don't beg to be chosen. They observe, they evaluate, and they decide. And when a man realizes that he is being evaluated instead of chased, it changes how he shows up. Choosing sends a silent message that says, I want connection, not confusion. I desire effort, not excuses. And that message doesn't need to be spoken. It's felt. It lingers. It challenges him to rise or remove himself. Ladies and gentlemen, when a woman stops chasing and starts choosing, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she tried harder, but because she finally stopped trying to convince someone of her worth. And that is when a man truly starts thinking about her. Distance reveals true intentions and real feelings in a way closeness never can. When everything is comfortable, familiar, and always available, people don't have to make choices. They can float. They can enjoy benefits without responsibility. But the moment distance is introduced, intention has to show itself. Because distance removes convenience. And when convenience is gone, truth steps forward. When you pull away, you are no longer making things easy. You are no longer carrying the emotional weight for two people. And that's when a man has to decide what you actually mean to him. Not what you could mean. Not what you might become. But what you are right now. Distance forces that decision. A man who truly cares does not become confused by distance. He becomes clear. He doesn't sit back and assume you'll return. He leans forward. He checks in. He makes effort because distance makes him feel the possibility of losing you, and that feeling activates intention. Men move when something matters. They stay still when it doesn't. Distance also removes illusion. When you are constantly present, you can mistake routine for commitment and comfort for care. But when you step back, patterns become visible. Does he reach out or does he disappear? Does he ask about you or does he only respond when it's easy? Does he try to reconnect or does he replace the space with distractions? Those answers don't come through conversations, they come through behavior. Distance doesn't lie. It exposes. Many women stay stuck because they keep hoping instead of observing. They keep explaining instead of stepping back. But distance allows you to stop guessing. You don't need speeches or ultimatums. You simply watch what happens when you are no longer doing all the work. True feelings don't fade in distance. They surface. If his interest was real, it grows louder. If it was shallow, it grows quiet. And either way, you gain clarity without sacrificing your dignity. Distance also tests emotional maturity. A man who values you doesn't punish you with silence when you pull back. He doesn't play power games. He doesn't act offended that you're no longer chasing. He respects your space while still making his intentions known. That balances emotional intelligence, and distance brings it out. A man who lacks genuine feelings reacts differently. He gets comfortable with your absence. He assumes access will return without effort. He doesn't step up because he never planned to. And that realization, while painful, is freeing. Because it saves you from investing further in something that was never mutual. Distance gives you information you cannot get, while staying emotionally overexposed. It shows you whether you were wanted or simply convenient, whether you were valued or just available. And that information is priceless. Distance also shifts your focus inward. When you're not busy monitoring his behavior, you reconnect with yourself, your peace, your standards, your intuition. And the stronger you become within yourself, the clearer everything else becomes. A woman who uses distance wisely doesn't do it to threaten or test. She does it to see clearly. She steps back not to disappear, but to observe. And observation reveals everything words try to hide. Men often don't realize how much a woman contributed until she stops contributing. Distance removes emotional cushioning. Suddenly, he feels the absence of your support, your presence, your consistency. And that feeling either motivates him to act or confirms that he never intended to. Distance also protects your future. Instead of forcing a connection that isn't growing, you allow it to prove itself. You stop building dreams alone. You stop investing in potential. You let reality show you what's real. A man who is meant for you won't be confused by distance. He'll be activated by it. He'll recognize your value when access is no longer unlimited. And he'll make it known through effort, not excuses. Ladies and gentlemen, distance is not loss. Distance is clarity. It removes false hope and replaces it with truth. It shows you who is emotionally present and who was simply enjoying the moment. And once you see that truth, you don't have to chase, beg, or wonder anymore.